She's a criminal. I know it. The words didn't just echo across the quiet, tree-lined street. They exploded, full of venom and conviction, from the mouth of our HOA president as she stood on her perfectly trimmed lawn, jabbing a manicured finger in the direction of our home. The woman looked absolutely unhinged, phone to her ear, shouting into 911 dispatch, as if she'd just spotted a wanted terrorist rather than a neighbor who simply hadn't answered the door. The accusation wasn't whispered behind curtains or passed along in gossip at the mailbox. It was screamed for the entire block to hear, and all because my wife hadn't come to the door after 20 minutes of relentless knocking. Not light, polite knocking either. Deborah had gone full battering ram, slamming her fists against the door like she was trying to breach a bunker. And now, she was telling emergency services that the woman inside, my wife, was some kind of criminal mastermind. When the police cruiser finally turned the corner and rolled to a stop in front of our driveway, I had already moved to the front window, frozen, watching this bizarre show unfold. Deborah darted into the street, wild-eyed and triumphant, pointing toward our house like she'd just cornered a fugitive. "That's her! Arrest her now!" she shrieked, practically foaming at the mouth with a grotesque sense of victory. The officer stepped out, young, cautious, one hand resting near his belt, clearly unsure of what kind of situation he'd just stepped into. Deborah rattled off half-truths and invented suspicions like rapid fire, gesturing so frantically she nearly dropped her phone. She looked utterly convinced she was the hero of this story. But then the front door opened not by me, but by Sarah. My wife stepped out slowly, casual as you like, one hand behind her back, the other raised slightly in greeting. And in that one moment, the entire mood shifted. The officer straightened, his eyes locked on what Sarah revealed. He froze. I couldn't hear what was said, but I didn't need to. Deborah's smugness drained from her face like a punctured balloon. Her victorious stance collapsed into something smaller, tighter, trembling. Because whatever Sarah had just shown that officer, it had turned the entire situation on its head. Deborah realized, far too late, that she had just declared war on the wrong person. 2 weeks before that circus act of a confrontation, life seemed a lot simpler. We'd just moved into what we believed was our dream neighborhood. Wide sidewalks, quiet streets, mailboxes adorned with cheerful sunflowers and decorative flags, the kind of place that looked like it had been pulled from the pages of a real estate brochure. We were excited, hopeful. Sarah had just gotten a big promotion at work, something clearly important and high level, though she hadn't said much about it. The boxes were still stacked high in the living room when I asked her if we should tell anyone what she did. She paused, setting down a kitchen plate. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Please don't tell anyone what I do for work. Just say I'm in finance." I raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Sarah had always been the more strategic one between us. If she wanted to keep something private, she had a good reason. I figured it was some corporate sensitivity or confidentiality clause. Nothing unusual. We were just trying to settle in, get the curtains up, find which drawer the forks went in, and meet a few neighbors. At the time, it seemed harmless. That illusion of tranquility was shattered the moment I met Deborah. A few days after moving in, I was outside rummaging through a box-marked garage, trying to locate our garden tools. The sun was warm, the air crisp, and I was halfway through debating whether to start on the backyard when I felt a presence, a pair of eyes drilling into the side of my head. I looked up and there she was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed like a bouncer at a club that didn't want me on the guest list. Late 50s, platinum helmet of hair styled in a no-nonsense bob, and the unmistakable aura of someone who owned at least 2 pairs of indoor-only shoes. She didn't blink, didn't wave, just stood there like the house itself had insulted her family. After 5 excruciating minutes of silent observation, she finally approached marched across the lawn, as if she had just been summoned to investigate a code violation in person. "I'm Deborah, president of the Homeowners Association," she announced, not like she was introducing herself, but like she was issuing a citation. She thrust a thick binder into my hands with the weight of a small encyclopedia. "These are the rules and regulations of our HOA. You are expected to read and comply with every page." I flipped it open out of reflex. 300 pages of regulations, fonts so small they looked like legal disclaimers, and an index that actually included the phrase, "acceptable lawn gnome dimensions." I tried to be polite. "Wow, this is comprehensive." She narrowed her eyes. We take community standards very seriously here. That was the moment I realized we weren't living in just any neighborhood. We were living under a regime. She warned me that she would be checking in frequently. And, as if on cue, a little boy rode past on a bike, waving cheerfully. "Hi, mister," he chirped, then turned to Deborah and frowned. "Why are you always so angry, Mrs. Deborah?" The woman's face twitched. She didn't reply. Just then, Sarah stepped outside, carrying a box labeled "Office." Her ponytail was neat, her stride calm, but she radiated a kind of quiet authority that you couldn't miss. Even in jeans and a t-shirt, she looked like someone who didn't suffer fools. Deborah's eyes locked on her. "And you are?" she asked, like Sarah needed clearance to exist on her own front lawn. "Sarah, Michael's wife," she answered smoothly, setting the box down. "Nice to meet you." But Deborah's eyes narrowed with a strange kind of recognition. "You look familiar. What do you do for work?" Her tone was too sharp, too pointed to be casual. "Finance," Sarah lied without a blink. "Pretty boring stuff." Deborah didn't look convinced. She lingered for a moment longer before finally turning and walking off, binder in hand, demeanor just as rigid. As she left, she gave Sarah one last glance over her shoulder. Suspicion, maybe fear, hard to say. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset. "That woman gives me the creeps," I admitted. Sarah only smiled that mysterious little smile of hers. "Don't worry about her," she said, voice calm as ever. "People like that always hang themselves if you give them enough rope." At the time, I thought it was just a figure of speech. I had no idea how prophetic it would turn out to be. Deborah didn't waste any time turning our lives into a performance of her own paranoia. It started with emails. Endless, obsessive emails. One arrived about a tree in our front yard, allegedly being 2.5 millimeters over the HOA height millimeters. Another accused us of positioning our trash cans at a 15-degree angle from the approved alignment zone, a term I didn't even know existed before then. Then came her most absurd grievance yet. She claimed our vehicle's rear bumper extended half an inch beyond the designated parking threshold. I measured it myself. It was more like a quarter inch, but the point wasn't accuracy. The point was control. Every one of these messages was copied to the entire HOA board, as if she were building a legal case for war. There was nothing friendly or neighborly about it. It was targeted harassment, wrapped in legalese and policy citations, each more ridiculous than the last. And every time I was ready to fire off a heated reply, Sarah would stop me with a single look. "Let her keep digging," she'd say, calm and composed. "She's doing more damage to herself than she realizes." Still, I could see the tension building in Sarah too. Every morning, she'd check her phone, and her jaw would tighten slightly. Deborah had made it her mission to walk past our house several times a day. She always slowed as she approached, inspecting the bushes, measuring the grass, noting any deviation from her sacred rulebook. Sometimes, she even took photos. A neighbor quietly mentioned to me at the mailbox that Deborah had once made the Johnsons repaint their fence 3 times because the beige wasn't Sahara enough. Another confided that poor Mrs. Blancs that Maide Chen had to rehome her dog, a beloved, elderly Pomeranian, because Deborah claimed it barked too often and filed a formal complaint. The deeper we looked, the more stories surfaced. One neighbor even whispered that Deborah's son had been arrested a year ago, something hush-hush involving a failed sting and an attorney. Ever since then, she'd become even more obsessive, especially around anyone she thought had power. That explained the way she looked at Sarah, not just suspicion. It was fear. It was projection. And the more Sarah ignored her, the more determined Deborah became to provoke a response. It all came to a head one Thursday afternoon. I was at work when Sarah called, her voice low and tense. "Deborah just tried to break down our door," she said, not panicked, but definitely disturbed. Apparently, while Sarah was on a high-level video cologne, she couldn't leave without causing ripples. Deborah had chosen that exact moment to stage an HOA-style assault. She rang the doorbell repeatedly, banged on the frame with her fists, and even cupped her hands against the windows, peering in like some kind of suburban stalker. When no one answered, she didn't back off. She shouted, loud enough for the entire street to hear. "I know you're in there. You can't hide. I run this neighborhood." It was insane. The kind of behavior you expect from a deranged character in a thriller, not a woman who chaired block parties and pushed for monthly potlucks. That night, over dinner, Sarah was quiet, thoughtful. I asked if we should report her. Sarah just nodded slowly, chewing in silence. "She's escalating," she said finally. "People like her don't stop. They escalate until someone makes them stop." The next evening, everything changed. I came home from work, rounding the corner onto our street just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, painting the houses in that golden glow that always made the neighborhood look like a real estate ad. But something was off. I could hear sirens close, too close. Then I saw the cruiser, flashing lights, pulling up right in front of our house. My stomach dropped. Time slowed. A police officer stepped out, scanning the street, and I realized with a jolt that the only person outside to greet him was Deborah, standing at the edge of her lawn, practically vibrating with anticipation. She looked like she'd just won the neighborhood lottery. I killed the engine and jogged to the front of the house, unsure of what to expect. That's when I heard Ither voice, high-pitched and shrill, feeding nonsense into her phone before the police even fully stepped out of the car. "She won't answer the door. She's suspicious. She's planning something," she said. "She looks just like someone from a wanted poster." I stopped short. Was she serious? She had actually called the police on Sarah for not answering the door. The officer, trying his best to remain professional, asked her to clarify what the emergency was. "The emergency is that she's secretive," Deborah wailed. "People like that don't belong in neighborhoods like this." Inside, I watched through the window as Officer Martinez, a young guy, maybe mid-20s, nervous but trying to hold authority, took notes while Deborah kept pointing dramatically at our house. "I'm the HOA president. I know when something's wrong," she barked. Martinez tried to defuse it, but she wouldn't let up. And then Sarah appeared. She came out from the garage entrance, walking steadily toward the officer, hands empty and visible, her posture as calm as ever. But there was something about the way she moved, like she was in complete control. Martinez turned to her, startled at how composed she was. "Good evening, officer," Sarah said evenly. "Is there a problem?" Deborah started shouting again. "That's her. She's the one. She won't talk to anyone. She's been hiding. She's dangerous." And then it happened. Sarah, still completely unshaken, reached behind her back slowly, deliberately. Martinez's eyes flicked to her hands. He moved one step backward instinctively. Deborah shrieked, "She's armed, she's got a weapon." But Sarah's hand came forward holding something entirely different. Something small, metallic, gleaming in the fading light. The badge caught the sun just right, and I saw the shift in Martinez's eyes. His expression changed in an instant, from caution to stunned recognition. He stood straighter, his voice cracked. "Chief Johnson?" I blinked. Did he just call her chief? Deborah froze. Her phone slipped slightly in her grip. Martinez, visibly flustered, began apologizing profusely, stammering through words like protocol and dispatch didn't inform. Sarah raised a hand. "At ease, officer," she said quietly. "You're just doing your job." She then turned to Deborah, who looked like she'd just been slapped with a frozen fish. "Miss Cunningham," Sarah said, her voice taking on a new edge, "you've made some very serious accusations based on nothing but assumptions. I want this incident documented in full every call, every threat, every attempt to weaponize your position." Martinez, still scrambling for his notepad, nodded vigorously. "Yes, ma'am." He looked more like a cadet in the academy now than a street officer. I stepped outside then, and Deborah turned to me, pleading now, her voice cracking. "This isn't right. She lied. She told you she worked in finance. She's not even supposed to be here." Sarah's face didn't budge. "Being cautious isn't the same as being deceitful," she said. I didn't want to start my new role with unnecessary attention, but I see now that silence only invited abuse. Deborah floundered. I have information. Evidence. You're not who you claim to be. One call to the mayor, and you're done." Sarah's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Then make that call. I had dinner with the mayor last week. You can bring it up when you explain the harassment charges I'm filing against you." Deborah looked around, suddenly aware that half the neighborhood was now standing outside, silently watching. No one moved to help her. Even her fellow HOA board members kept their distance. She had brought this all on herself. Martinez approached Deborah, clipboard in hand. "Miss Cunningham, I'm going to need a formal statement from you at the station regarding your emergency call. You're not under arrest. Yet." Deborah's eyes went wide, her voice high and hollow. You can't do this. I have rights." But the momentum had shifted. The queen of the HOA was dethroned in broad daylight, undone not by rebellion but by her own hand. She had picked the wrong woman to antagonize, and it was only just beginning. The neighborhood was quieter in the days that followed, but it wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind you feel before a storm rolls in thick, charged, uneasy. Deborah had all but vanished from view, but that only made things worse. People like her don't disappear without a plan. Sarah went about her business like nothing had changed, stepping into her public role as police chief with a calm professionalism that felt both natural and unshakable. She wore her uniform now when leaving for work, no more pretending to be a finance analyst. Neighbors treated her differently. Some were suddenly friendlier, eager to drop compliments or express support. Others kept their distance, polite but guarded, unsure of how to approach someone who now represented authority in its most literal form. Even kids were whispering about her like she was a real-life superhero. But Deborah's silence hung over everything. Sarah could feel it too. Every so often, I'd catch her checking the security cameras more often than necessary, or pausing mid-sentence when a car slowed near our driveway. She never voiced it, but I knew what she was thinking. Deborah was regrouping, and the next move would be bigger, louder, more calculated. It came in the form of an HOA email. Not from Deborah directly, she wasn't foolish enough for that, but from a group calling themselves Concerned Residents for Neighborhood Integrity, which sounded official until you realized it was probably just Deborah and a few of her enablers. The email was short and dramatic. Emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Thursday evening. Attendance mandatory. Critical information regarding neighborhood safety will be shared. No explanation, no context. Just an ominous invitation that reeked of manufactured urgency. Sarah read it over my shoulder and said nothing at first. Then, finally, she spoke. She found something. Or she thinks she did. Her voice was low and measured, like she was planning out chess moves 10 steps ahead. I asked her again, more directly this time. "What is the Johnson case?" She hesitated. That pause alone made my stomach twist. "A suspect got injured during an arrest," she said. "He claimed excessive force. There was an internal investigation. I was cleared, but the optics weren't great." She didn't need to say more. I understood what she meant. Even when the facts are on your side, perception can be weaponized, especially by someone who thrives on rumor and manipulation. Thursday arrived like a final exam. The entire neighborhood seemed to be buzzing. Cars lined the curbs well before the scheduled meeting time. The community center was packed standing room only. People who hadn't shown up to an HOA meeting in years were now crowding through the doors, some clutching reusable coffee mugs, others holding notepads like jurors at a trial. Deborah stood at the front of the room in a bright red blazer, her smile forced and thin. She had set up a projector, complete with a slideshow ready to go. Her fellow board members looked uneasy, clearly roped into something they didn't fully support, but didn't know how to oppose. Sarah and I sat in the third row. She looked completely unbothered, her posture relaxed, her face unreadable. I, on the other hand, was sweating through my shirt. Deborah opened with faux humility, thanking everyone for coming on such short notice, and immediately launched into her performance. "We recently learned that our newest neighbor has not been honest with us about her background," she said. "While she presented herself as a quiet finance worker, she is in fact the new chief of police. Now, normally, law enforcement in our neighborhood would be a good thing, but what I've uncovered paints a very different picture." She clicked through slides like a prosecutor building a case. There it was, a headline from a local newspaper several states away. "Deputy Chief involved in controversial arrest." Then a grainy photo of Sarah standing beside a squad car. The next slide was even worse. A man in a hospital bed, bandaged and bruised. Deborah's voice dropped into mock somber tones as she explained that the man, a father of 3, claimed to have been assaulted during an arrest. She implied Sarah had used force unjustly, that she had been protected by the thin blue line. She leaned into the narrative, showing charts about police misconduct, spouting statistics about neighborhoods losing property value when controversial figures move in. It was manipulative, brilliant in its own twisted way, and it was working. I could feel the crowd starting to shift. Whispers, doubts. Even people who had smiled at Sarah days earlier were now murmuring and exchanging worried glances. Deborah ended with a dramatic call to action. For the safety and integrity of our community, I motion that the HOA formally request Sarah Johnson's resignation from her position. Hands began to rise. Not all at once, but enough, more than enough. People were being swayed by implication, not truth. Sarah stood slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She walked to the front, calmly unfolded a document, and faced the room. Miss Cunningham presented one side of the story, she began. Let me tell you the rest. She held up the paper. This is an official commendation from the mayor, the governor, and the attorney general. Murmurs rippled across the room. The man in that photo? Thomas Mitchell. He wasn't just arrested, he was convicted. He was operating a meth lab in a residential neighborhood, with his 3 children in the home. During the arrest, he attempted to destroy evidence by causing an explosion. The injuries he sustained were self-inflicted. I personally rescued those children from that house before it went up in flames. The crowd shifted again, this time toward disbelief, but not at Sarah, at Deborah. Sarah wasn't done. Miss Cunningham cherry-picked headlines. She showed you one photo. She didn't show you the commendations. She didn't show you the sentencing report. She didn't tell you that one of those children now writes me letters every Christmas to thank me for saving his life. Deborah's face turned pale. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Sarah's voice turned steely. You've used your position to spread misinformation, incite harassment, and make false accusations. And you've done it on record. She gestured around the room. You've embarrassed this community. You've undermined the trust of your neighbors. And you've done it for your own ego. A silence fell over the room so thick it was hard to breathe. Then someone clapped. A single, slow clap. Then more. It built into a wave. Even some of the board members joined in. Deborah stood frozen, her red blazer now seeming ridiculous rather than commanding. Sarah turned to her. I'll be speaking to my legal team about your conduct. I suggest you consult yours. Deborah made one last attempt at defiance. You think this is over? She hissed. I know things. I have connections. Sarah didn't even blink. Then you can call them. Maybe they'll visit you at the deposition. It should have ended there. But karma wasn't finished with Deborah Cunningham. A few days later came the annual outdoor movie night. A tradition in the neighborhood for 2 decades, families bringing blankets and lawn chairs, kids running barefoot across the grass, local volunteers projecting a kid-friendly film onto a giant inflatable screen. We went, of course. Sarah said we should to show we weren't hiding. We sat near Tommy and his family. He was grinning ear to ear, iPad in his lap, proudly showing us that his video from the HOA confrontation had already gotten millions of views. Mrs. Sarah, you're famous, he said. I smiled, but I also noticed something else. Deborah, sitting alone at the very back, ball cap pulled low, sunglasses on despite the dusk. She looked like a cartoon villain in hiding. And then, it happened. During the pre-movie testing of the sound system, something went wrong or perfectly right, depending on your perspective. Tommy's iPad, connected to a nearby Bluetooth speaker, somehow synced with the projection system. And in one of those perfect, accidental moments, his viral video began playing not on his little screen, but on the 30-foot inflatable movie screen, in full surround sound. Deborah's voice screamed out into the evening air. She's suspicious. She's a criminal. Her meltdown, her false 911 call, her complete unraveling played out for an audience of over 500. Faces turned toward her in the back. Someone gasped. Someone laughed. Someone whispered, "Isn't that her?" Deborah tried to slip away, but she tripped over a cooler and landed face first on the grass. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. People recognized her. It was over. Within a week, a for sale sign appeared on Deborah's lawn. Within 2, the house was sold. Word was she moved to Florida. I later heard she tried to report a neighbor's flamingo lawn ornament to police. Some people never learn. Tommy's YouTube channel exploded. He launched a series called HOA Hall of Shame. And Sarah just went back to doing her job, quietly, effectively, the way she always had. And now everyone knew exactly who they were dealing with, and no one would ever knock on our door without good reason again.